We have to be more international. We have to have more international students, and not for the university, but for the Finnish society and actually for whole Europe. And we need students to come here to study. Some of them might actually stay here in Finland for a lifetime, and that'll be great. Not all of them, and that'll be equally great, because then we have a lot of friends, hopefully, in the different countries. As we have now, we have a lot of exchange students that we meet in the different countries, saying that, hey, I studied in Jyväskylä, and this is as great as it used to be.
Imagine the random student who accidentally stumbled upon applicants. They stumbled upon our website. What's the message that you want to send to them?
Yeah, be brave. Apply to us. You will be surprised. This is a good community.
I mean, I'll tell you, just personal perspective. Not that anybody asked, but my show, I can say it. I was very positively surprised by everything here. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I'm big on doing this is because I wish I could have made the decision to come here when I was a high school student. Terve ja tervetuloa. Welcome to the JYU For You podcast. My name is Irfan and I'm your host with the most glasses. Today we're joined by the Rector of the University of Jyväskylä, Jari Ojala, who gives us a little bit of a glimpse into his academic journey. He shares with us how he became a student at JYU, how he ended up doing a PhD at JYU, and how he got involved with a bunch of different administrative roles while he was an educator, i.e. a professor at the University of Jyväskylä. Since 2023, he has been in the role of the Rector of the university, and today he shares with us his vision, his plan, his hopes for the University of Jyväskylä, and he makes the case why a degree from JYU is the best way to future-proof your career. We hope you're going to enjoy. Cheers. No niin, oletko valmis?
Olen valmis.
Okay, no niin, mahtavaa. I always got to double check my own pronunciations of these things. This is the fun part when I have actual, Finnish speakers at the podcast. You guys can always correct me when you want to. So let's get one thing out of the way immediately. Rector Jari, Rector Ojala, Professor Jari, Professor Ojala, or can we just be friends and be Jari?
Just be friends and be Jari.
Oh.
That's the way we do it in Finland, and especially here in Jyväskylä. That's
something actually I had a similar conversation with Timo a few weeks ago, and I asked him the same thing, just because, you always want to be careful. Okay, is there a title that I need to add here? And he said, maybe you can fill us in on the details a little bit, because, you got a little bit of a more historical background than us. He said that it originally came from Sweden, this mentality of using a first name basis. And I guess back in the 70s or maybe 60s or whatever, in Finland, there was still this kind of norm of okay, let's make sure that we use a title. You know anything about the history of that? Or
I don't know all the history, but still, when I was studying in 1980s, there were several professors that you have to call Mr. Professor, and it was very formal, and that's the way in many European countries even today. But I will not give the names of those countries. You can guess.
I can give one because we mentioned one a few weeks ago. A colleague of mine who studies in Germany, he had this big surprise when he came to JYU to study, and he was like, "Oh, we can go on a first name basis. This is kind of cool." And I think it doesn't take away from the respect. I think some people think that it takes away from the respect towards the position, but I think it actually adds a little bit of the respect, because then the focus is more on the human aspect of, the relationship, the bond and whatever, and you're respecting the person and not necessarily focusing too much on the title. It's more about you respect the person who is offering this value from a certain perspective.
Yeah, that's true. You earn your respect actually by doing right things, and that's what we try to do every day. Exactly. Right things.
So something kind of like I feel like you started this off a little bit. You studied in the 1980s.
Yeah, I started in 1987 in this university.
Okay, so you're a JYU alum.
Yeah, homegrown boy.
Domestically, naturally raised in town. So how did you end up in Jyväskylä?
I live in Ostrobothnia, something like 250 kilometers away. And at that time, this was more or less the closest university with 3 buses to come to Jyväskylä every day. And my original idea at that time was to go to my military service first and check what I would do as a grown-up. And I was actually working as a journalist in a newspaper after school, and that's what I was supposed to do for half a year or something, and go to military service. And I only place that I applied for was Jyväskylä, because I was not supposed to go to university at that time. But then they selected me. And I was supposed to come here just for those years that I will study, but this is like a Hotel California. You can check in, but you can't get out.
I got to check if we can have that, as a background. I need to check who owns Hotel California now. But wait, so like I'm assuming you went to Lukio?
Yeah.
Okay. And I find it very fascinating how I think maybe 90% of the people that I've ever spoken to in this city, when I ask them how did you, what was your college application process and whatever, everybody's basically, oh yeah, I just applied to Jyväskylä. And I'm always fascinated by that mentality of like, don't you guys ever have backups or whatever? You just like fell in love with the place, gave it a shot, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't...
Yeah, I of course, the situation was quite different still back in the 1980s, and today the entrance exams are a little bit different at that time. But Jyväskylä was at that time very popular study place, as it is even today. So this was to say that this is the study town of Finland, which is even today as we have compared to population, the very large amount of students here in university and University of Applied Sciences, and also other places. So actually, you can feel university here. You can feel the studies students here. You have a life here. So that was the main reason, and especially in the 1980s, the other possibility would have been for me Helsinki University, but at that time the housing in Helsinki was awful. So it was extremely expensive and difficult to get. So therefore, I never applied to Helsinki.
Are you sure you're not talking about the situation today?
I don't know how it looks. My daughter has studied in Aalto University, so we have a pretty good understanding how it goes today. So it's not that good either in today, but at that time it was really awful.
Okay. No, I mean, because my understanding is that it's a lot rougher comparatively, in Helsinki and I guess also a little bit in Turku than it is, for example, the more inward you go into, let's say, Tampere, Jyväskylä and whatnot. But that's really cool. You people that just like decide on one place and give it a shot. I do want to say one thing. You can feel that it is a student city and it's a student environment, but it doesn't feel cramped, which I kind of like. How many students do we have? 14,000? Like just at JYU?
In JYU, we have 14,000 students roughly.
Okay,
and then we have, in our open university, we have 26,000 students enrolled, but those are mainly doing remote studies, and they are mostly adult.
We got 26,000 people in open university.
Yeah, that's the largest open university in Finland.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you know.
Okay, I get informed sometimes on the podcast. Nice, 26,000. That's a lot of students.
Compared to, especially if you remember how small country Finland is.
Yeah. I mean, like for
5.5 million or so.
Yeah, and how much of the population is actually, like at a stage in their life to be looking at colleges and universities and looking into higher education. That's actually probably a really big percentage. Okay, that's something that I should probably like look into the data a little bit. So back in the day, how do you have any idea, like when you were a student, how many students were there studying at the university?
In this university, it must have been way below 10,000 because it's still in the early 1990s. It was like 8,000-9,000. So we have increased the number of students quite rapidly during the last 15-20 years anyway.
But see, even 8,000 to 9,000 is kind of like a big number for me, just because when I did my bachelor's, we had like a university of 2,000, and it kind of felt like always kind of cramped. And here it's 14,000 people. It's like, I don't think that I've ever waited for too long to eat at a student restaurant. Those are my important things as a student. I don't want to wait too long for lunch.
Yeah. And Jyväskylä used to be the more or less the second largest university in Finland for decades. But now after certain mergers in many towns where two universities have merged, we are not anymore in that way in the place second, or even though our number of students has increased quite a lot. But we have this very long tradition going back to 160 years of a higher education. So we have a university tradition here compared to many other Finnish towns.
So since you're mentioning years and whatever, I gotta ask, what did you study? History?
History was my main, but I studied also economics and social sciences, education.
Okay, so that explains all the research combinations of Finnish business history and like the different international relationships. Was history like your plan from the day you applied, or?
Yeah, that was one of my plans because not in Lukio, but before that I had not necessarily the best history teacher, and my idea was that we should do better in Finland. So I go and study myself as a history teacher, and I would be better. And then I did that, but I never ended up to be a history teacher, even though I have a kind of a label of doing that.
Okay. See, then we might actually have something in common, and not when it comes to bad history professor. I've had like excellent history professors my entire life. I mean, I'm kind of lucky for that. I had pretty bad physics professors in undergrad, and one of the kind of like urges that I had was after I finished undergrad, I was like, I still want to try and do like, continue in physics just to be like, you can teach this properly.
No.
And that was part of some of my motivations for doing a master's here in physics later on. But so,
and most of my history teachers were brilliant, but
you have
that one person.
Yeah, you have that one person that gives you a nick, and you're like, this can be done better. I can make a difference, and you try to make the difference. So why a PhD then?
Never planned for research because in my family we didn't have any previous experience what it means to be a researcher and what PhD is all about actually. But when I was doing my master's, I kind of get really into it, and this is fun. This is really stuff that I would like to do. And then there was a lot of circumstances in the early 1990s. First of all, the economic distress that we have, and actually even more or less economic collapse that Finland experienced after the Soviet collapse and so forth. And because I was working in a newspaper throughout the period I was here as a student, so I was working all the time. The idea was that I would go then back to a newspaper or perhaps to history teacher because I have the certificate. But then there was not that many of those possibilities anymore. Then I took my military service after my master's, which was not very bright thing to do anyway, because then I was a little bit too old for that stuff anyway. But after that, because of the economic challenges in Finland, the Finnish government sold a number of governmental-owned firms. And they got a lot of money out of that. Mm-hmm. And there was a political consensus that part of that money has to go to research. And so they created first doctoral training programs, Finnish graduate schools in the mid-1990s. And I was very lucky to get into one of those national graduate schools for economic and social history. We were only about 5 persons starting in that school. And that was a really great opportunity. It was very, very fascinating time. And then I did my PhD and continued my career in research.
But that's I gotta say that's a really clever policy by the government to kind of like deal with an economic crisis like that. Okay, let's try to heighten our educational potential.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the government today is doing. So we are having a lot of cuts in Finnish economy at the moment, but they are not cutting from universities or research and development. Actually, they are increasing the funding in there because that's the investing for the future. And you have to remember that all the universities are more or less governmental owned. So we don't have private universities as in many other countries.
Fortunately, if you ask me, but that's my biased opinion. But now I can also see a little bit of your own personal passion why you care so much about it, and we're going to get to that a little bit later about promoting PhDs and trying to increase the number of people that are getting into higher education, because I guess in part there's a level of gratitude that you have towards that opportunity that you had at the time. So back to the 90s for a moment, could you have ever envisioned yourself in the 90s when you were doing your PhD or when you were a master's student to be in the position that you're in today?
No.
Not even for a second, never.
Not even a second. I would know that I would probably do some kind of administrative thing alongside with my research, which I was start to do already in the late 1990s because of I saw that there are a lot of things that we could do better, like the way that I studied my history studies in the first place. But I can't just cry out that we have to do better. I have to do something myself to do that, and that's why I get involved in the late 1990s, early 2000s to develop in the doctoral studies in the Faculty of Humanities at the time. So that was my first step to the dark side, that is to administration. Even though I was doing the research at the same time all the time, and then I end up to be in the head of the department and vice dean and dean and then rector. So that was a kind of all the time there. And of course, as a researcher, we have to run huge projects all the time. So there was a lot of administration in those projects anyway. So it kind of came up in time, but never I thought I had this kind of a straightforward path. Perhaps when I write my memoirs in a very old age, then I will say that at age of 5 I decided that I will be the rector of a university, but that is not true.
Hey, I'm gonna hold you accountable if I read your memoirs and you're like, yeah, I was actually, but then you're gonna be like, no, I said age 5, but I wrote here age 4. See, that's when the idea came to mind.
I have to remember that.
You'll have the podcast around, so you can always remind yourself before you start writing the memoirs. So, as part of the little informal conversation that we had before we started recording, you said that the C building was your favorite building on campus even then, and it is today.
Yeah.
You never pass by and like, oh, that second floor with the big R, I would love to, just go through that door, check it out a little bit, get the office. Never kind of crossed your mind?
No, I have never actually even visited that one. And then, of course, the rector office was in a very different buildings throughout this. But at that time, it was actually in the building C when I was studying. But rector was at the time so high up from the students. So that.
Meanwhile, here we are in 2024.
Yeah, but everything changes. As a historian, I have a kind of a firm belief that future is better than past.
Yes.
And it always is. Just if you don't trust, just go enough past. So you have people starving and you have plagues and wars and everything. Of course, there are a lot of challenges today and future. That's correct. But still, things are so much better today than they were back in 1980s. Even, of course, I was younger then and have a lot of fun in the evenings. But I still have a lot of fun in the evenings. So.
Got any clubs to recommend? What's the best go-to in town? I'm a London fan myself.
I honestly don't know. I don't go to clubs anymore. So that's long gone. I'm too old for that.
No, you're still young at heart. You're still young at heart.
Yep.
If you're
that I am. Yeah.
Plus, I mean, everybody makes a comeback. Isn't like Dingo making a comeback with like a little tour or something with like I know they have a movie coming out in end of 2024.
I will not make a comeback to 1980s, honestly.
I'll wait for the memoir for the comeback here at the comeback. So since you studied history and you did a little bit of, I mean, not a little bit, you did a lot of research in history. You got a PhD. What was the main thing that you researched, and in what way do you think does it inform in any way the way you make decisions nowadays?
Actually, it does. I'm an economic historian, business historian, and what I was actually doing in my research, I was studying the economics of shipping during the age of sail. So it looks like very different from today's perspective. But one aspect actually was the organizing the businesses at that time. And there is quite a lot to learn from those times. Of course, we have a totally different technology now, but the problems were the same. How to make the right decisions, how to make the right strategic plans for the future, especially in the environment where you have a very kind of lousy information around you. You have to make the decision based on what you have at the moment. And that's actually true even today. So we make all everyday decisions regarding university and whatever, and we try to do the best decisions that we can. But we are more or less bounded with the information we have. So that's it's kind of It's kind of helps me every day to kind of feel and understand that and it also makes you more responsible from your decision making. So we learn from history, but what I think we do even more is we learn with history.
Sure.
So that means that if we look at past, we know that those decision-making processes, those decisions actually made the difference.
Yep.
So we have to be kind of careful when we are doing decisions today, because they might have a very, very long trajectories in the future. And that makes you a little bit humble on what you're doing.
Something that I thought about right now while you were talking was about that, information, the data that you have. I feel like nowadays maybe the issue might be that you have too much information. Yeah. And then I guess history might help you from that perspective. You've seen, you can look at it from the lens of the information that you have today about those processes and see how they made the decision based on the information that they had. And then that might help you, I think, maybe parse through the information that you get nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, today we have a lot of possibilities to qualify the information, and we have stuff to check out the data and so forth. So we're still better off. But of course, the problem is that there is so huge amount of information. I was a couple of days with the Nordic rectors in Brussels in Monday and Tuesday, and we got a really, really a lot of information every day on what is going on with von der Leyen's new cabinet and what will be the situation in the European Union for the next 7 years. And so much information that it will take many days for me to try to understand actually what we got it out of that. But still, I think the main lines are very, very clear.
So visiting Brussels, you say, are we getting ready for a political career now? Because you wouldn't be the first rector who became a politician.
No, it's more like lobbying. We have to be there, especially at the time when the new cabinet is coming formed and new policies, new multi-annual funding processes for European Union, and also new European research area funding models, new European level education funding models. All of these are going to be changing in the next year or so. So now it's time to be there, hear what they are planning, try to influence if that's possible.
So I guess your Monday and Tuesday were not easy. I don't envy you.
They were fun. We have 60 rectors from different Nordic countries altogether. So it was also a way of networking and meet some old friends, make some new friends, nice. Because there's always people are changing even these positions.
So getting back to the rectors actually, and I gotta ask you the dumb question. What is even a rector? What does a rector do? Like can you make them have steak every day in the student restaurants? What is the extent of your power?
Actually, rector in Finnish university is more like a CAO. So we are running the business, and I must say that rector actually has quite a lot of power, but vice rector doesn't use the power by him or herself, but together with the vice rectors, together with the deans and the heads of the departments and vice deans and so forth. So we try to find the right direction for the university, and that was the kind of my main task for my first year to make the plan. That what are the challenges in the future? What we are going to do to tangle with those challenges, and that's making a strategy, kind of a blueprint what we are going forward. And now we made a more or less the I would say metrics that what we have to count in order to see that whether we are going the right direction, and now we are just executing.
Okay, so the first year was a planning phase, which I kind of figured that would have been what are you going to do in the first year? You got to familiarize yourself with the infrastructure that you have right now. But what are the big plans? Like, what's the next big thing that's happening? Can you give me a little glimpse into the blueprint?
The most important thing is that we have to be more international. We have to have more international students, and not for the university, but for the Finnish society, and actually for whole Europe, because whole Europe is aging now quite rapidly. We need more people here, and we need students to come here to study. Some of them might actually stay here in Finland for a lifetime, and that'll be great. Not all of them, and that'll be equally great, because then we have a lot of friends, hopefully, in the different countries. As we have now, we have a lot of exchange students that we meet in the different countries, saying that, hey, I studied in Jyväskylä and this is as great as it used to be. So they at least they have this similar kind of ideas I did when I came here to this whole California. That it's hard to leave from here. So that's the major task for the university. But for us, it's even bit more complicated than many other universities, as we are very big in teacher education. And in order to get teacher's degree in Finland, you have to know the language. And now we are making plans how really open up our teacher education for international students, how really open up our psychology for international students, because that has the similar challenges.
So like the psychology department, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also social care, which are areas that actually we need more international talent to be working in those areas. But at the moment, because of the Finnish law, it's bit complicated. But that's what we are now working on. And I'm sure that we will have a very good structure on that in a couple of years.
Okay, so you immediately jumped into the ring with the difficult things, so I respect you for that. Let's start off with this then. In one of the speeches actually that you recently had, you mentioned how it's important for Finnish education to have this ability to generate a blueprint, make a long-term plan, and actually implement it. But one of the constraints that you have in Finnish education is exactly, sometimes there's a law, sometimes there are governments changing and whatnot. So how do you envision to deal with that if you have like this vision, but there is a constant change in policy? How can you implement that vision if there's a constant change in policy?
We actually have also every 4 years we have a discussion with the Ministry of Education on what will be the plans for the next 4 years, and we had those discussions last week. And these were more or less, this my blueprint, or our blueprint was what we discussed there. And we came to agreement that this is the way to go, and get even more into details. So we have a backup from the Ministry of Education regardless on what will be the governmental structure. But of course it will be always also a political thing. But at the moment I think that there is no political party in Finland that will say that let's cut funding from the universities.
Yeah, let's have an impact on education.
Because that's everybody understands that this is really how we make the future for the country, for the Europe, for the whole world actually. So there is a very 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 good consensus in Finland to believe in a higher education, to believe in the research and innovation. So that kind of helps us. So I'm not that worried about the political situation. Of course, there's always kind of a local how different universities are seen from the political perspective and so forth. But I'm not even that. Even from that, I'm not so worried about it, really.
Okay, no, that's actually a really good thing to hear, just because I think the university, not even thinking about like, does it have international students or local students or whatever, it's very important for the city. And I think it having, a consistent vision and having the ability to maneuver around different changes is very important for the city to develop and, in the grand scheme of things, as you kind of mentioned, have value towards the Finnish society. And you mentioned a little bit innovation right now, and you mentioned also beforehand in another speech, I read a couple of them, as much as my bad Finnish allows, that you would like to see the university, in Finland being kind of not at the effect of changes, but at the cause of changes, having an actual impact. So in what way do you think JYU is having an impact on, let's maybe think about it locally on Jyväskylä, and then kind of in a broader sense in Finland and maybe internationally?
Yeah, we make impact because we educate people. And those people that we educate will get their masters and PhDs out, and they will be working in the different positions. Right, from if you get the masters now today, you will be still in a working life in the 2060s, perhaps even 2070s. So that's the long trajectory. And for the Jyväskylä University, we are not that much of a local player, as we are quite a large university in relatively small town and relatively more small area. So only roughly 25% of our students actually come from this area. They are coming all around Finland and also from abroad, and they will go all around Finland and also abroad because we are educating like teachers for the whole country, and that's the main issue. But at the same time, we could actually do even more for the local economy, as we actually do. We are the third largest employer in the central Finland.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I think the city is the second largest. So we got to add a couple of extra employees to beat them.
Yeah, the largest one is the health.
Yeah, the welfare region.
Yeah, welfare region, and then city, and we are the third one.
Wow.
So even that's important, but at the same time, we have these research innovation projects. We are actually producing quite a lot of startups from our research.
Oh, do you have any idea off the top of your head how many we have?
We have a couple of very known ones, like First Beat. Everybody or many people in Finland know what that means, and so we do have and we have even structures to help out the possible coming startups. We have I guess 10 startups there, kind of that we are breeding at the moment, and we hope that something will come out of them. I'm pretty sure that will. And we have already sold some of our startups, unfortunately, to abroad. So that's happening all the time.
Okay, so there's a lot of evolution happening. In a sense, the way I'm taking your argument right now is that a university education is kind of future-proofing your career.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people might have the argument when they look at the statistics, a lot of the low-income jobs are the ones that are currently in demand. But those are the ones that it comes and goes. But investing in an education future-proofs you. Whatever happens, whatever changes, you have an education, you know how to adjust yourself to what's going on in society. Would that be kind of the rough argument?
Yeah, that would be an argument that if I put my economic historian's hat on my head, then you have a clear proof that more skills you have, more higher education you have, more probably you will get a decent job, and you are also you have the possibility for lifelong learning, and that's actually why we are actually even so big in the open university, because there's a lot of adults that would like to add something to their portfolio, so that they can be even more productive and find new jobs and so forth. So that's also something that everybody must bear in mind, that after your masters you are ready at that time, but you have to improve yourself all the time, and therefore we offer these open university courses as well.
But I think even beyond open university, a great thing is the alumni studies.
Yeah.
That I think they implemented that maybe in 2022, 2023. I think they extended it at least, that you can have it for like a couple of years if you want to take classes at the university. So it's continuously investing into that education. I like that mentality I really view that as a long-term investment, because I can't remember who said this, but somebody mentioned this to me within Finland, that, the biggest resource that Finland does have are its educated people.
Yeah.
Which you said we're falling a little bit compared to the peer countries. So what's something that we can do to, catch up or even exceed them?
Yeah, that's we just have to try to invest more to the basic education. Still in the early 1990s, from OECD countries, we were the number one in share of the young adults with a higher education, and now we are not at all in the first ranked positions. But even in Finland, the share of the higher education has increased very rapidly during the past 25 years or so. But there is a lot of things still to do, and we need more international students for sure, as the demographics are not necessarily best possible ones for Finland at the moment. I
mean, for any developed Western country, the demographics are not that great.
And Finland and Japan are especially doing badly in those figures.
I guess there might be a continuation to that study that you guys did back in the day. What was it, like 10, 15 years ago? Japan and Finland, for their post-war development, now you can have a little bit more of the extra demographic stuff. But okay, so we're mentioning, international students and the desire for internationalization. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, what does internationalization mean to you as a concept?
It's first of all, it's not that simple that there is only one type of international student. We have exchange students. We have degree students for starters. We have exchange students from Erasmus countries. That is more or less the group of universities within Europe. Then we have people who are already have international kind of a background, are living in Finland, might have already higher education, but that's not really comparable with the Finnish degrees, and we need to help those guys as well. Then we have people coming from places like Ukraine, and we have to help those guys as well. So it's very complicated, very various type of a background of people, and at the same time, we are not the only university in Finland who would like to have more international students. We are not the only university in Europe that would like to have a more international students. This is the challenge in all universities at the moment, and not in the universities, but in the societies in the end. As we need people to be in those places to build the societies in the future. That's just a cold fact.
So let's maybe go for a couple of those different types. I guess maybe the main focus being PhD students, master's degree students, and now new potential bachelor's degree students. So why would somebody want to come to JYU and do a PhD? In your opinion, what's your perspective?
We have a certain amount of programs that are really world class. We have a good infrastructure in many of the fields that need good infrastructure, and we have a very good PhD model, and we are actually developing it even more at the moment. So we have basically good programs in PhD studies, and it's a proven concept, and we produce quite a lot of PhDs every year, 150, 160 or so.
Do you have any idea maybe how many of them are international? I'm asking a lot of things.
I can't remember by heart, but there are certain programs that actually most of the students in PhD programs are international. And if you look at the national figures, at the moment we are producing something like 1,600 PhDs every year in Finland. And if I remember right, 500 to 600 out of those are international.
Okay. So
it's quite good.
So it's a decent chunk.
Yeah, and it has increased quite a lot during the 2000s. So when I did my PhD in 1999, there were very few international students in Finnish PhD programs. There were, but not so many.
And now there's a pretty good chunk. I mean, personal experience, I've seen a lot of, I would say even like maybe 50-50. Toss a coin, your demo instructor might be Finnish, might not. So
yeah. And that means when we have more PhD students, that means that they are also, most of them are, in one way or another, somehow engaged also to teaching. So they will be there to help out the international students. But of course, all the Finnish teachers can speak English at least, so
I would add perfect English to that.
Yeah.
I really got to say. Do you think that we're benefiting now as a university from those Finnish flagship programs for PhDs? Do you think that's going to help with internationalization?
Yes, that was not probably the most important task of the flagship pilot project, whatever. But nevertheless, 1,000 more PhDs in 3-4 years, hopefully 3 years. And again, I can't remember by heart. I just last week saw the numbers where we have also the number of international students. But it was very, very huge success of this program. This program was so there were a huge amount of applications for all of these pilot programs in our university and also other universities, and a huge number coming from abroad.
I kind of am not surprised by that, just because at some point I was looking into doing a PhD, and a lot of them seemed like the most creative and genuinely cutting-edge PhD programs that you could think of. Because a lot of them were very a lot of PhD programs, when you think about them and when you look at them internationally, it's kind of like stuff that, it's been around for a while. And a lot of these PhD programs were like, okay, this is the PhD that you're going to need for developing stuff that's going to be incredibly relevant in maybe 10, 15 years, not just looking kind of into the past, just kind of look at, okay, what can we do now to prepare ourselves for the future?
Yeah, that's true. And if I go back to the 1990s when we had these graduate programs, there were only few of them, but they were very nicely organized. And I would say that then during the last 20 years, the organization hasn't been in a general sense, we kind of lose a lot of that at least attitude. It was like a pioneering thing that now we are creating a new type of doctoral studies in Finland, and now looking at the pilot programs, what we have these 1,000 new. I feel the same, that now we have a kind of a same idea that we have back in '95, that now we are creating and renewing our doctoral programs for good, and that's kind of a great feel. Remembering that first administrative job that I got was coordinating PhD studies at the Faculty of Humanities. So this is very dear to my heart.
Okay, so you could kind of like feel a personal element there.
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of maybe like going a level below now educationally. Do you think that international master's degree programs have a similar meaning and similar impact?
They could have, but they are also a little bit tricky compared to perhaps other types of international programs, because in international master's program you have a student coming here for 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
And how to integrate her or him to a Finnish society in just a couple of years, it's very, very difficult. And that's one of the main reasons why we are now opening up also BA Bachelor of Arts international programs to have the better integration.
I mean, I had Juha Kantsikas on last episode, and I told him immediately like that's a program that I'm really rooting for, just because I've heard that there's been a little bit of chit and chatter around the water cooler that we're also super duper supportive of that program. Because I think it's a golden opportunity, exactly what you're talking about, that level of integration.
Yeah.
Because these kids are going to stay here for a bare minimum of like 3 years, plus 2 with the guaranteed second, guaranteed masters. So they're effectively going to be here for 5 years. You're giving them enough time to integrate themselves when it comes to the language, integrate themselves when it comes to the actual economy, the business society, and whatever. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see if it works out. I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful, and I think there's a good team that has the ability to make that happen. But is there something that we could maybe as a university do for international master's degree program students to kind of speed up that integration or help them, stay involved and, provide something meaningful to the society?
Yeah, that's we are trying to do that in a 2 ways. First in integration in terms, for example, language, as you probably know that we are more or less the number 1 in the world in research on the Finnish as a second language. So we know, at least in theory, how that should be done. And we have the Integra program where we try to put the Finnish language right into the classrooms to help in a kind of a practical situation to learn the language. Not only way that you will learn the language to go to a separate course that has nothing to do with your subject matter. It doesn't work like that. And the other thing is the talent boost and other programs where we try to network with our international students, with the job markets, with our companies, with the other organizations, and try to find decent places for them to take part of as a trainees and this kind of a thing. So those are very, very important. But the challenge is that whether we find these job opportunities or not, because we can't just create them. We need the whole society to take part of that discussion, and therefore we have constant discussions with the town and city and other stakeholders as well.
Do you think, and this is just me kind of like throwing out the idea, do you think there is any value with the alumni community? Like, I'm wondering, is there maybe a way to look towards integrating the alumni community into this process? Because there are a lot of, JYU alumni, both within Finland and around the world, and somehow have them help out a little bit with, looking for jobs and whatever, have that closer maybe cooperation. Yeah,
that's again something that we are already doing and working on. But then I have to confess that Finnish universities, we are not as not even near to what the American universities are doing with their alumni. So we it's kind of a force that we could use more.
Yeah.
And then we have to do that in future even more. We have a good people and organizing that already. But there's so many things that we could do better.
And I think there's also a lot of potential there. Exactly, kind of like you were mentioning when you bump into, alumni from JYU from around the world who tell you, oh, is it still as great as it used to be? And we had an event in May 2024 where Erasmus alumni that studied, 20 years ago decided kind of semi-spontaneously to come here to the city and see how it's going and have a little bit of a celebration. So I think that's one of those resources. Is that maybe somewhere on the blueprint? Which part of the blueprint is that? Is that roughly over there on the blueprint?
Yeah, we don't go that much in the details. That then how the blueprint is actually executed will be something that faculties has to
go back on the ground.
Back, yes, and then the ground level, because they know the people really. So we kind of get a direction, and we of course also give the funding for the direction if they have good ideas.
Oh yeah, you got to support like that level of innovation.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's again both you and I guess the system have that maybe know-how and a desire. Okay, this is a good idea. Let's try to innovate and be creative. Is there anything that you're worried about when it comes to student life nowadays? Would you say that, maybe historical perspective, is it more difficult to be a student at a Finnish university today than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago?
Of course, the overall situation around the world and of course the always the struggle of will I get my grade and will I get my job and what I'm really worried about is loneliness, especially during the COVID era, so that so many students were just left home and they didn't interact with each other. So the studying is not only a studying for exam. It's kind of a studying for life. Many of our students are for the first time out of their homes from their families, and that's the kind of a cool thing and very important part of the studies. And therefore, during the COVID years, I was really worried about those first and second year students who haven't been in the campus for 1.5 years. So they are losing the most important momentum of the studies, really.
And especially that, element of social bonding that you really need in those first 2 years. I remember, granted, this wasn't in Finland when I was studying in the States, and we had a couple of, new freshmen come in. So those first and second year students, you could really see that palpable difference in social integration, loneliness, and anxiety and whatever, and a lot of, those may be big buzzwords that we've seen too oftentimes and we maybe disassociate with them, but they still have importance and meaning.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, there's a huge demands from the society all the time for younger people. And we have very smart students here and they understand those demands and they might kind of get frustrated with those. And we have to find ways to help them out. We don't want to, we can't afford of losing any students. Not as a society, and of course not as a university either.
I mean, even just like from a moral perspective, you don't want to take away the opportunity for somebody to learn, educate themselves, become become the next rector of the University of Jyväskylä.
There are better job opportunities also in the future than a rector.
What is that also a position that's going to be replaced by artificial intelligence?
Rector, never. I don't think so. then we will be very, very, very difficult world if that's going to happen.
So you're not going to let the AI department of the university look into that?
Do you want to have a university where all the decisions are made by artificial intelligence? Really?
I mean, listen, to be honest with you, I always get in trouble for this. I think AI is one of those big hypes. I think it has a lot of potential, and that's why I genuinely like the fact that we have studies in artificial intelligence, because I think it's one of those things that unfortunately right now is being monopolized a little bit by billionaires and overly eccentric people who like to buy companies and then change their names to a single letter word. Sorry, Elon. But then we open up kind of like this opportunity for regular folk to come into the profession and kind of shape it in a way that it actually has value for society. That's kind of what I like about it.
Yeah, and artificial intelligence is something that we are using on a daily basis in our research. It helps quite a lot of in many types of research. But in the end, you still need a human touch. So you can't do your research only with AI. But then these are kind of a popular things that write your speech with AI. I'll never do that. As a historian, I'm proud to write my own speeches. I don't need any computers to do that.
Actually, coming on one speech that I wanted to mention, and I'd feel bad if I didn't mention this one. You gave I believe it was the keynote speech for Independence Day in 2023.
Yep.
At the city of Jyväskylä. Are you giving that again this year, or was that just a?
No, it's just they will change the people.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah. But something that I just wanted to mention about that speech, I kind of appreciated how much you use that historical perspective, like let's go back and see how the situation was and how remarkable this progress is.
Yeah.
So where do you see the University of Jyväskylä within the next, actually, how long is the term of a rector?
I will be in this position for next 4 years still.
Okay.
Then they're gonna probably can't reapply depending if this is successful or not. So, but if not, then I will return as an ordinary professor.
Do you miss teaching?
Yes, I do.
Oh.
I really love teaching. I really love research. But I haven't done that much teaching for many years anymore as a dean and other positions. That will not have been possible. But still some research in the Sunday mornings, even today.
When you have a little bit of a moment, have you ever thought about maybe trying to, is there a way that you can maybe integrate a little bit of the rector work with teaching, maybe some sort of like a leadership course, experiential leadership?
Not in a very large extent. Of course, we have this internal actually leadership program for our staff members, and I usually give 1 hour there. Lecture. But that's not really lecturing from my perspective. The real lecturing means several hours or something like that. But not that much. But of course, I have kept these public speeches. So actually, I'm using stuff from my
teaching
lectures and teaching in those speeches anyway.
That's kind of like, that whole, what we mentioned, future-proofing your career. Yeah. You pick up these little elements for different things that you're doing, and then you can apply them wherever you can. So you're definitely still the rector for the next 4 years. Hopefully your health is going to keep you going and everything. Where do you see the university in 4 years? Where do you see it realistically, and what do you want to see with it in the next 4 years?
There will be change, but change is not very rapid in a university. So still we have these like new openings for international BA programs. We will have at least 2 or 3 of them running in 4 years, but they are not yet making any huge change. Because still the bulk of the education will continue as it is, because that's our 90% of educations will still be in these old and very good programs though. There might be a lot of improvement in the research side though, so because that's so depending on the external funding and depending on what kind of fundings we will win in the coming 4 years. So there will be very fascinating, and those can be even quite rapid changes that's happening in the research side. Of course, again, the main lines don't change because you have the certain persons and certain professions there and certain capabilities. You can't just create something totally new out of nothing. So it develops again on something that we already have. So there will be a lot of evolutionary process, perhaps some revolutionary even, and something definitely will be different in 4 years than it's today, as is relates to our campus, because we are now losing some of the old buildings that we have that we can't afford anymore. So that's actually at least something.
But as I've discovered, it's not a permanent loss. They're not disappearing. They're going to be around.
No, we are not bulldozing them down. So they are highly protected. They will be still here, and we might even use some of them in the near future anyway. So, but nevertheless, there will be changes. But I would say that all these blueprints and strategies that we are having now, they are targeted for 2030s, 2040s.
Wow.
Because that's the main target. Because then we will have a serious demographic challenges, and we have to make changes now. If we decide today that we will open a new program from a BA level to a master's level, totally new program. Earliest time that our first masters will get out of this program will be after 7 years. First PhDs after 10, 15 years, and we will have a decent research programs in around 20 years in the program. So that just shows that these are very, very slow processes, but we have to make those decisions now, and that's to my idea of a learning with history. We have to make now the hopefully right decisions. But future will show that if those were right decisions. But at least we use the information we have at the moment.
Do you see anything? And this is just kind of like a kind of throwing this around. Do you see anything like, in 2030, 2040 when it comes to the master's degree programs, the international master's degree programs? Because we kind of agreed that the integration is possible, but it gets a little bit trickier in that reduced time frame. What do you think? Is there a chance that time frame is going to become longer? And this isn't a commitment to anything. This is just kind of throwing around an idea.
Yeah, there certainly will be more for international master's degree programs, and we certainly have to have better integration processes.
I keep saying 2 + 1. 2 studies, 1 year of language, but that's a tricky one to implement.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe 2050. Actually, by then I might be the rector.
Yeah, you will be. But then we have artificial intelligence that take care of the language problems.
Yeah.
Hopefully not, because we need language teachers and
trust me,
that area as well.
I've seen Finnish ChatGPT. You don't want to mess with that. That's a rough one. So something that I want to kind of like wrap it around a little bit, and maybe like a random fun question that I have for you. You still have your overalls? Which closet? Is it in the rector's office?
I never bought one, because in the 1980s that was not the case really.
Really?
There were only very few areas in our economics nowadays. Business school was probably the only one that had overalls.
Okay.
I don't have one.
Okay, we need to get you an honorary one. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
We should get a custom one. Every rector should have their overall. I mean, we'll get the student union on it.
Yeah. It started in the technological universities, I guess, and then business schools. But it became more popular in the 1990s in all disciplines, and now it's of course all
everywhere.
Over the place.
Okay,
I'm too old, basically.
No, you're not. I made the mistake with Timo that I almost agreed with him when he said that last episode. So I'm like, absolutely not. You're a young man. So since this episode might be, part of Applicants Day, in which case, if it is, hey guys, I can be in 2 places at the same time. Mm-hmm. Do you have a message for potential applicants to master's degree programs and our bachelor's degree program to the University of Jyväskylä? Imagine the random student who accidentally stumbled upon Applicants Day, stumbled upon our website. What's the message that you want to send to them?
Be brave. Apply to us. You will be surprised. This is a good community.
Positively surprised.
Yeah, positively surprised, of course.
I mean, I'll tell you, just personal perspective. Not that anybody asked, but my show, I can say it. I was very positively surprised by everything here. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I'm big on doing this is because I wish I could have made the decision to come here when I was a high school student. I wish there was a bachelor's degree program. I wish I knew about Finland. I mean, okay, I knew about Finland. I knew Helsinki was a place in Finland. Now I know it's the capital city. And other cities. I've learned a little bit. And that's why I think it's kind of important to have this messaging about, because I genuinely do believe this is a great place that you can come to and a great place to study. And also genuinely, it's a welcoming society, regardless of whatever you might, God forbid you read the media, you think it's the end of the world as we know it. But it's a welcoming place, and kind of like what we mentioned, integration. There may be the systematic one gets a little bit tricky, but there is integration on the ground, which I think is like, the really important thing. The random classmate who's willing to give you the word that you're missing in Finnish, the restaurant, worker that's always happy to simplify the language in order to make you, help you a little bit learn and whatever. So that was our message for the potential students. Do you have a message for current students, both international and Finnish students, who might actually, be coming, some exams might be coming up soon?
It will be more like in a similar way that this is the place to try off, and of course what you already thought about is I hope that we have a kind of a unique community here, and it also relates to the fact that this whole campus is more like a complex, so everything is in a walking distance, even the most remote parts of the campus area, and that's still one of our strengths, and I would say that this is the most beautiful campus in Finland, and one of the most beautiful campuses in Nordic countries, really.
Listen, I'll be biased. I think it's one of the prettiest in the world.
Yeah.
So it genuinely is gorgeous.
And winter is not that bad.
It's not bad at all. I don't get you. Okay, maybe we shouldn't overhype it too much, but it's wear a couple of extra layers. You're going to be fine. It's really cool to walk on the lake.
Yeah, and these buildings, they are warm in the winter.
Yeah, sometimes a little bit too warm, if you ask me.
And there's always saunas possibilities.
How many? Wait, okay, so does the rector's office have its own sauna? If it doesn't, I'm going to be disappointed.
Actually, it doesn't, but we have a couple of saunas in university.
I mean, I think Seminaarimäki just has like two maybe? I know there's one in the nanoscience building.
Two, I know. The Seminaarimäki has a two, and I don't know the exact number of saunas we have in a university, and it also some other campuses we have less than 10, I would say. Less than 10.
You have the exact number of PhD students, exact number of programs and everything, but not the exact number of saunas on campus.
Yeah.
That might be a disappointing. People have a stereotype of Finland. You know that. And maybe like the last message for today, since we're giving a message to everybody, and since we bump into alumni all the time, and technically you're speaking to both an alumnus and a current student. Yeah. I'm in a quantum special state. What's the message that you have for alumni?
I hope that you remember us. And also there's a possibilities for alumni to study with through the Open University as everybody actually has. And we have quite a lot of a program for alumni, and you should actually register as an active alumni, and you will get a newsletter and all kind of a fancy stuff that we are doing.
Actually, I got the first newsletter a few weeks ago, so it's nice to stay informed and to kind of like maintain this connection.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Noni, Jari, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate that we were able to make this happen. I'm very grateful for your honesty and just like giving a little bit of these insights about, about your study career here, about being a professor, being a dean, being so many positions that I can't even list. You have way more patience than I do. And I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing parts of that blueprint being realized more and more as my own studies and my own journey here continues. And for you guys, I also hope you guys are going to get the opportunity to actually see the realization of the different parts of the blueprint. And also, we're going to call it officially now the blueprint. Yeah. But also that you guys are going to have the opportunity to experience everything that JYU has created now for all of us students, for the faculty members, for the staff. And I hope you're going to join us. Kiitos ja moikka. Cheers.
Bye-bye.